what if I told you that one of the most important legal standards we have, the very definition of insanity in a courtroom, was created because of a bizarre murder case back in the 1840s? It's an incredible story about delusion, a verdict that shocked a nation, and a legacy that still makes us ask, where do we draw the line between crime and madness?
Right after he was arrested, these were the words of the killer, Daniel McNaughton. Now that doesn't sound like a typical confession from a political assassin, does it? It's more like a window into a really troubled mind, and it immediately sets up the central mystery of this whole affair. Was this a calculated political hit, or was he a man tormented by forces that nobody else could see? So, to get to the bottom of how we ended up with our modern insanity defense, we've got to go right back to the scene of the crime. Let's paint a picture of what happened.
Okay, picture this. It's London, 1843. We're on a busy street right near all the government buildings. A man named Edward Drummond, who happens to be the private secretary to the Prime Minister Robert Peel, is just walking home. Out of nowhere, another man walks up right behind him, pulls out a pistol, and shoots him in the back. It was an incredibly brazen attack, right out in public, and pretty much everyone believed the real target was the Prime Minister himself.
But here's where it gets really weird. McNaughton, the shooter, he doesn't run. He doesn't try to get away. He's actually about to fire a second pistol when a police constable tackles him. And the victim, Drummond, at first, they thought his wound wasn't life-threatening. But sadly, due to complications, he dies 5 days later. And just like that, this case turns from assault into murder.
And this is the question that just gripped the entire nation. I mean, on the surface, it looks like a political assassination. But McNaughton's own words pointed to something completely different, forcing everyone to ask, what was really going on in his head?
To answer that, the court had to take a really close look at the man himself. And what they found, well, it was a portrait of profound contradiction. You see, Daniel McNaughton was like two different people. On one hand, you have this respectable, self-made man. He ran a successful business, he was sober, hard-working, he even taught himself French to read philosophy. But behind closed doors, he was living in a nightmare. He was absolutely convinced that the Tory political party was persecuting him, that spies were following his every move, and that they were plotting to kill him. It was a classic case of what doctors back then called partial insanity, where someone could seem perfectly normal in most ways, but be completely consumed by one massive, overpowering delusion.
And if you need any more proof of how competent he seemed, get this. When the police arrested McNaughton, they found a bank receipt on him for £750. That was a huge amount of money back then. We're talking tens of thousands in today's money. This was not some desperate, broke guy. By all outward appearances, he was successful. And that just made his secret delusions all the more confusing for the court.
So the legal system had this huge puzzle on its hands. And the trial? Oh, it was about to become a moment that would send shockwaves through the entire British establishment.
The trial basically became a big fight over what it even means to be responsible for a crime. The prosecution argued that, look, even if he had some strange ideas, he was still sane enough to know that murder is wrong. But the defense came back swinging. They argued that his delusions were so powerful that they had totally destroyed his moral compass, leaving him completely unable to control what he was doing. He was, in their words, no longer a responsible being.
And when it came to the medical evidence, it wasn't even a contest. The defense brought in 9 different medical experts, including some of the top minds on mental health at the time, and they all said the same thing. McNaughton's delusions had taken over. And the crucial part? The prosecution offered nothing to counter it. They didn't call a single medical witness of their own.
So, with the evidence piled so high on one side, the judge basically instructed the jury on how they should vote. And they didn't even need to leave the jury box to think about it. The verdict came back, not guilty on the ground of insanity. And let me tell you, the public was furious.
And all that outrage? Well, it had real consequences. The fallout from this verdict went all the way to the highest levels of government and forced them to create a brand new legal standard that we still use today.
Even Queen Victoria got involved. I mean, she had survived a few assassination attempts herself, so you can imagine she was pretty concerned that someone could commit such a violent act and be found not guilty. She and the public demanded answers. So the House of Lords did something very unusual. They called in the country's top judges and basically demanded that they clarify the law once and for all.
And the answers those judges came up with, well, they became known as the McNaughton Rules.
For more than 150 years, this has been the bedrock legal test for insanity in England, across the United States, and in tons of other countries that have a similar legal system.
Okay, so how do they actually work? Well, think of it as a two-part test. First, the defense has to prove the person was suffering from a disease of the mind. Second, they have to prove that because of that disease, the person either A, didn't understand what they were physically doing, or B, if they did, they didn't know that it was legally or morally wrong. It's all about what the person knew. It has nothing to do with what they felt or if they could control their impulses. And that laser focus is both its greatest strength, it's very clear, and its biggest criticism.
But the story doesn't end there. The legacy of this case, wow, it's incredibly powerful, and we are still talking about it today.
So, to really get it, let's look at what came before. Before McNaughton, the standard was this ancient thing called the wild beast test. You literally had to be as clueless about your actions as an animal. So the McNaughton rules were a huge leap forward, focusing on rational thought. Since then, other tests have come along, like the Model Penal Code test, which is a bit broader. But McNaughton, it's still the foundation for everything.
Okay, let's be honest. We've all seen it in movies, right? The insanity defense, there's this massive public myth that it's some kind of get-out-of-jail-free card that criminals use all the time to beat the system.
But the real numbers, they tell a completely different story. It's actually wild. The public thinks the insanity plea is used in something like 37% of felony cases. The reality? It's used in about 1% of cases, and it's only successful in a tiny fraction of those. It is an incredibly rare and incredibly difficult defense to pull off. And what about Daniel McNaughton, the man at the center of it all? Well, here is the ultimate irony. He was never actually judged by the rules that carry his name. After his trial, he was sent to a psychiatric hospital, where he spent the remaining 21 years of his life. And that leaves us with this massive question, doesn't it? The rules that we use to define legal insanity were created based on what people understood about the brain in the 1840s. Today, we have brain scans and a much, much deeper knowledge of mental illness. So, does that old standard still make sense? The case of Daniel McNaughton forces us to ask, have our laws kept up with our science? And what does it really mean to be responsible for our own actions?